Lila Love, Dr. Whooves, A True Friend by Swedish Dove. One day after that, Lila Love had moved to Ponyville after she got a letter from her cousin, Violet Whooves. She had first a bit hard to find some good friends in new life. But even she had her cousin and some of his friends, Twilight, Rarity, and Appleton. She even wanted to be friends with some more, but at first she was very much shy to make friends with others. But she became friends with one of the other ponies in town, was actually Derpy. Derpy and Lila became very much good friends. And sometimes she saw that Derpy was spending time with Dr. Whooves, one of those red ponies in town. And she thought that he was very brave, very smart, and she even often asked some of her friends who Dr. Whooves was. Most of them didn't know much about him since he moved there for a couple of years ago from Trollingham. But some of them actually told her that he was used to be a teacher in Trollingham, but then he retired. But sometimes he's still teaching other ponies about anything, math, history, or even science. But sometimes he usually spent time with either Derpy or some other friends. But one day, Lila Love was not want to be studying some other topic within math. But since she was not so good in math, and to ask Twilight for help, well, she wanted to ask, but then she found out that she has been will be busy for the next couple of months, since her duty as a princess. So she asked Derpy if she can help, but Derpy was not either so good at math as either. So then Derpy remembers Dr. Whooves might be able to help her. So Lila Love actually went to Dr. Whooves' home and asked if he could teach her someone about a better in math. And since he was retired as teacher, but he agreed to help her to get some work done with the math. So for the next couple of days to several weeks, Lila had very much difficult to learn about the new types of math. Some of it was quite easy to learn, but then she had to, like multiplications and division was some of them she had very much harder to study. But thanks to Dr. Whooves, some of the basics from those to learn was easy enough. Then one day he even gave her a test in math. And those were actually one of those testing were multiplication, division, and some other types. And she knows that she would fail the test. But Dr. Whooves improved her during this time before the test to be encouraged enough to be brave and focus on the teaching. And try not to fail. Even if she failed, it's just a setback. Doesn't she have to give up teaching or studying? Even though she failed the test, he will still help her to pass the test again. In fact, when he gave back the test, she was hoping for maybe like 5 or 6% right. But this time, it was not that at all. The test ended up to have 85%. It was more than she ever believed to even have. She thanked Dr. Whooves about this and she asked, is it possible that she could work as a teacher as well in Ponyville? And Dr. Whooves said that there were only one available place for a teacher, and that was actually in history. And since he was a great knowledge of history, of predates of the founding Equestria and the current. But he didn't want to be a teacher anymore, not as in public. And she asked him if he could teach her all about his current history as known about, so maybe she could be the teacher. At first, Dr. Whooves was not much thought about the idea to teach her all again about history. But then again, since most of the phyllis and cults in town doesn't know about much of the prehistory about founding Equestria, and since he and probably a few other ponies out there know so much about history, and he is about actually teaching most of history himself, so I agreed. Alright, you came here about tomorrow, same time at 8 a.m. so I can teach you all about history, and please take notes as much as possible, since there are much of history to remember. Alright, said Lila. And early next morning, Lila was very much ready to teach about history, but at the same time very much nervous, since Dr. Whooves told her there's so much about history she has to remember, and since she already knows some parts of the history itself, only part of what she had learned from school and told by her friends and family. But to learn all about the history from zero, from the predates of the founding Equestria up to present day. Even she was so much nervous, and she went to Dr. Who's home to teach about history. And when she told Violet Wins about this, he was very much proud of his cousin to learn about more history. Even himself was not that much history itself, but he wanted to improve and even was grateful that his cousin wanted to help others. And when he actually told her if she needs any more help with study of history, he can be there for her, even he doesn't know so much himself, but to at least have her help her to study in for a test or something. And she agreed. And at Dr. Who's home, he had made a small bench where she could sit and where he can teach her like in a classroom. Even he was not that much fond of being a teacher anymore, but at least he helped other ponies to teach about math, history, all kinds of studies that he could do. And for next couple of weeks, the study of history went quite well at first, but then she had to do some other tests, and some of the tests failed quite little. But he didn't encourage her to stop for that. He encouraged her to focus and try over again. And over she was afraid about this being failing and maybe not perhaps being qualified as a history teacher. But Dr. Who's didn't give up on her because he could see the potential of her to be as a history teacher. Even he then said, "Don't give up, Lila. You will be a teacher. Don't give up. Even you failed a test or two. Even I failed a few tests before I became a teacher myself." You did? Of course. You see, many of the teachers around Equestria, they always have failed in some test. You see, to remember everything we learn from school is not even possible. If you had to learn everything, then that means you have a very strong memory. But to remember every detail about history is not is very hard to remember. If you had to remember every speech of Celestian for the last 200 years, every those years, would you be able to remember? No, exactly. You might only remember some of those most important ones. Which is, since history has so much of it written down, but then we all have to remember history itself cannot be told, even if you don't remember the exactly point of history. since there is so much of our history. It's not possible to remember every detail of it. But if you remember one part of the history, then the naturally working back. And he was right. She started to remember every detail about this history she learned from him, and soon enough, after she had learned all about this history, he had a final test, and this test was actually approved from AAA, Equestrian Education Association, and she needed at least 90% to be approval to be a teacher in Ponyville. And when she took the test, she was so nervous. And afterwards, she left Dr. Who's home and went for next day to get the result. And during this 24 hours, she was so excited, but mostly afraid not to get the 90%. She thinks that she will only get like 80 or 70%. That is not approved, not acceptable to be a teacher. And the next day around 8 a.m. she went to Dr. Who's home and she was sat down on the bench hoping for the result, and he gave her the paper of the test. He had all do the rights. Before he turned around, he looked at her and said, "What do you think about this test? Was it hard enough for you to remember every detail about this, what happens over the last 1,000 years?" "Yeah, it was very hard." "Well done. Like I said, you had at least a 90 or more to be approval to be accepted as a history teacher. But now, turn your paper and see the result." Lila took a deep breath and turned the paper and closed her eyes. And when she looked at it, she didn't believe the result. It wasn't 80%, not 70. It was actually much higher. She had 93% of rights, and that means she was approval to be a teacher. I was not even prepared for you have to at least 93. I wasn't prepared for at least 90 or 91, but 93 was very much grateful. And as a former teacher, and approval from the Christian Education Association, you are accepted to be a teacher. Congratulations, Lila Love, said Dr. Whooves. She was so beyond happiness as she actually hugged him and said, "Thanks." And from that moment, she started to teach at the local school. After that she released had her class, she studied the history. At first, many students were very much bored. They didn't pay as much attention about history. Only a few was listening carefully. It was actually Apple Blue, Scootaloo, and Sweetie Belle, and even Rumble. They were only ones who most paid attention. Especially Rumble, who is the most part of the history of the Wonderbolts, from before the founding of the Wonderbolts and the principal. And then when she found out that this, many of the students didn't even pay much attention about it. She told Dr. Who's about it, and he got seriously furious about it. Students should listen to your teacher, so when he came to school to help her as an assistant, he told them, "What would you don't know about history?" And the students just looked at him. If your ancestors haven't recorded your history or our past, how would we know about history itself? If you ask your grandfather or your great-grandfather if he know about what happened, if he knows anything about what happened like a century earlier before he was born, what happened then? If he remembers any great detail about a war or a great event, And what they said, nothing. Nothing at all. Nothing worth to talk about. Exactly. If we don't have the record of our history, how would we know? If we don't know our own past, how can we know what will happen in the future? But then the Amateur said, well, the future isn't even written yet. This will never happen. Exactly my point, said Dr. Whooves. If we don't know about our own future, well, how can we know about our own past? You see, history is what the past shaped us in today. All the past events form our future. Every detail about this history itself teaches us how to be how we are. Some of your ancestors might have been part of the event, the wheel, or the part of the development of Candle, building the royal castle. And then, if don't we be told about that, how we know for sure that part of history not being told by their descendants or any future generations? So now you will have to listen to Dr. Lilia, to Lily, to your teacher about this, because she knows a lot about history. And also, she had actually introduced part of history that was very grateful. She had actually learned a lot about it, and she wanted to teach you about the most foremost heroes in equestrian history, the old pillars. And she did. And from that day, after Dr. Who's help as teaching at the school, every student listened carefully to her studies, and afterwards she graded him as to be a great help. And he said, what I do not do for a true friend. You are a true friend and a very much excellent teacher and also a great student. Over my years, I have never had any more much great students like you, Lila. And she was grateful to have a great friend as Dr. Whooves. And sometimes Dr. Whooves helped her at the studies as well. And that's how Dr. Whooves and Lila Love found a true friendship and, well, the end.